Today on NorCal Slot Car Scene, I'm going to talk about a couple of new products from NSR. I've seen a lot of misconceptions and confusion about why these products exist on the internet lately. NSR just announced in the past day or so the new chassis Flattener Evo, which is a new model as opposed to the chassis Flattener that they brought out a couple of years ago. We're also going to take a look at the brushless technology, which they brought out a few months ago. It's a motor designed for the highest level of competition in 24 scale. Now let's take a look at the chassis Flattener. This is the original chassis Flattener from a couple of years ago, and it's still available, and it works great on NSR chassis. They have recently just announced the chassis Flattener Evo, which has some new features on it that will make it a little bit more versatile as opposed to the original chassis Flattener. The original chassis Flattener worked great on NSR chassis, but it was a challenge with the plastic materials found in the other manufacturers like slotted or racer sideways. The new chassis Flattener, you can see now it has an adjustable temperature setting. On the old Flattener, you could set it in a manual mode, but that just turned the heat on and the heat kept rising. You could not control the heat. And now with the new Evo version, you'll be able to control the heat, which will make it viable for other chassis other than just NSR. The NSR chassis worked great on the original chassis Flattener in the auto mode, and it kept the temperature at about 120 degrees, but that just wasn't enough for some of the other plastics from other manufacturers. You can see there's a second LCD on this. I'm assuming it's a timer. I don't know yet because we haven't seen exactly what all the features are, but it looks like a definite improvement and much more versatile than the original chassis Flattener. Why are chassis Flatteners needed in the first place? Why aren't these chassis flat out of the box? And that's because of the process involved in injection molding. They tend not to be perfectly flat out of the box, and there's no control to this. Some are slightly off, some have quite a bit of bow in them. So to be able to flatten the chassis is a definite improvement in the performance of a slot car. If you're racing casually, it probably doesn't make much difference unless the chassis has just some drastic bow in it. But if you're racing at the top level, that extra handling, that extra tenth of a second will make a difference, and you need to do that. The second question is, why can't NSR just do this at the factory? You know, if they don't come out of the mold right, flatten them at the factory and then send them out. And the problem with this is that shipping, when the product is, let's say they flatten it, and the product is shipped from NSR in Italy to your local distributor, then to your local dealer, and then sits on the shelf in your hobby shop for a while, there's no control over the temperature and the humidity and all those other variables in that shipping process, or if it's sitting in a warehouse that's not totally temperature controlled, or it sits in your mailbox. If you live in Phoenix and it sits in your mailbox for a day, it could definitely bend just right, sitting right in your mailbox. So there is a need to flatten the chassis when you get it before you assemble the car. Now, is it overpriced or is it a professional tool? There's a couple of schools of thought here. One, it is a professional tool. It's going to do the job very well. However, a lot of people have mentioned that you can do this in an oven or in a pan of warm to boiling water and flatten the chassis with materials that cost you 10 to 15 bucks. And that's absolutely true. And I've done that with some other chassis. But this gives you just the convenience of it being all in one. You don't have to deal with an oven. You don't have to deal with boiling water. So it's partly a convenience. The other issue that I see, or just an observation, is that the one NSR chassis that I did in the warm/boiling water method, when I took it out of the pan, it was perfectly flat, but it had lost all its stiffness. And I couldn't get it back. I tried to put it in an oven and bake it, take the moisture out of the chassis, but it was a throwaway. So keep that in mind, specifically on NSR chassis, that the water method, if it's working for you, that's great. In my one experience, it didn't work. So as I said, I think this is a professional tool. You can do the job a lot cheaper, but the convenience is why this is priced as it is. And it's not terribly expensive. It's under $150 looking at the exchange rate. So I definitely think this is a professional tool, reasonably priced. But like I said, you can do it for less, do it using the home method. Next, I want to talk about the brushless technology that NSR has brought to the market. This is not for the 32nd scale racer. This is a high-end motor in the $300 to $400 range. And as I said in the video I did last week on brushless technology, I don't think brushless is to the point where it's a viable option for 32nd scale racing. But at the highest level of ISRA Eurosport racing, it definitely is. NSR has proven that this type of motor that they're bringing out can compete at the highest level of ISRA Eurosport racing, the World Championships last year in New Jersey. So what's the point of this? Why is it needed? As I mentioned in that previous video also, that motors in the ISRA Eurosport class are in the $500 and up range, and you need multiple motors for a large event, as well as constant maintenance. So this fulfills a need in terms of a motor that is relatively inexpensive compared to its competition and is definitely competitive. Now, there's been a lot of misconceptions that I've seen out on the internet lately, and I'm going to address a few of those. This is not a drone motor that's just NSR has slapped its name on and made from a $15 motor, put the label on it, and it's $300 motor. This is specifically made for racing at the Eurosport level. The drone motors have their applications, and this is based on a drone motor. There's no question about that. So the architecture is the same. But a drone motor is for inexpensive hobby drones. This is made for racing at the highest level. These motors are handmade, very much like a Formula One motor. They're a handmade motor. They use exotic metals like titanium and so forth, and they're built to race. One of the other reasons why these motors cost more is that the drone motors are mass-produced in China, and the NSR brushless motor is hand-assembled in Italy. So that makes a big difference, and that's why this motor is different than your run-of-the-mill brushless motor. So the people out there that saying that NSR is just slapping their label on and upping the price are just wrong. I see a very similar comparison in the real car world. There's no comparison to a Prius, which is a great car in its own right, or a Ferrari 296 GT3. There's a huge price difference. The Prius is made for the everyday person. Lots of taxis use Priuses. And the Ferrari 296 GT3 is for racing at the highest level in GT racing. So there's a lot of comparisons between the drone motor, the NSR brushless, and the comparison between a standard run-of-the-mill Prius and a Ferrari 296 GT3. So is this overpriced or is it a professional tool? It's obvious this is a professional tool. Is it overpriced? That's for you to form your own opinion. It's not overpriced in terms of what it's compared to. When you compare it to what you would have to use as a brushed motor, it is not overpriced. Could they produce these for $150? Only NSR knows. But it is not overpriced compared to the competition, and it is a professional tool. NSR has taken a beating lately on the internet, people bashing these two products because they think they're either overpriced or just not a good value. And that's obviously an opinion that's up to you. You're the only one that can determine whether these are a good value. They are definitely professional tools. I will probably get the chassis flattener because to me it's just easier to work with. I don't race in 24 scale Eurosport racing. If I did, I would have one of these motors because I think it's the best alternative now in terms of competing in the Eurosport class. I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to my rant about these two new products, but I think NSR is to be commended for bringing new technology and new products like this to the market. You're the only one that can determine whether either of these products is a good value for you. So thanks for watching. This is Jim Rose with NorCal Slot Car Scene, and now let's get back to racing.